George and I are brothers. We're 8 years apart. I had started my career in the software industry when he was still at home. And so I didn't really know him as an adult until he moved to Atlanta, which is where I lived at that point.
I was graduating from college. I mean, it was one of those moments where there's a life change going on and there's another change that happens and they intersected at the same time. And that was North Point started up.
It could be that you're here tonight and you are an outsider. In fact, you kind of feel like an outsider because you don't know the songs and you don't know the people and you don't know me. In fact, the only thing you know is the Galleria because you've been here before.
And as we got involved with that, it became evident they needed technical help, and that's my background.
And at that point, it was really just a startup, but they decided to build a building.
The process, as you know, of trying to close on a piece of land and then build a building.
I started noticing there was a fundamental shift in the way I had grown up and attended church, and the way people my age and younger were going to want to go to church and experience the gospel.
If this is your first time to our church, you're here on a very exciting Sunday for us because this is our first time, obviously, to be on our new property.
Because George was running front of house, they asked him if he could help them find someone to design the audio technology for their brand new building.
We looked at all the people out there and it became evident no one knew what we wanted. I wanted a concert event to happen in church, and no one was able to do that except live production companies, and they weren't really set up to do work with general contractors and architects to make sure the buildings were built correctly.
He really felt like he understood what the church wanted from an audio perspective, and that he was capable of delivering that.
And so that was the nucleus of the idea. Hey, we need to get this formed into more of a business and a proper relationship internally with all the engineers and designers and accountants, and to make a run at this.
Somehow we convinced the executives there with, I think, a one-page spreadsheet and a commitment to make this work. They allowed us to design both the acoustics as well as the audio system for the first auditorium they ever built. And when we finished that project, it was so successful that churches literally all over the country were asking who did the audio. That very quickly focused us in the church market. In the beginning, when we first started Clark, the typical design scenario was that the architect would bring in a subcontracted audio, video, lighting. Most of the time that was 3 different organizations.
It's very difficult to get all this coordinated, even if they're looking at the same set of plans.
We wanted to focus on providing a single source of accountability.
I think one of the first innovations was we were responsible and we took the hit of it, good and bad. If something went wrong, it was our fault, we fixed it. If something went great, we were heroes.
One provider was providing both the design and the implementation and support.
That was one of the biggest things I think that we innovated with, is just taking responsibility of making sure it met the expectation of the client.
In the context of understanding what was happening in the church market itself, how churches were doing church on Sunday morning. When we started the business, one of the things that George was very passionate about was most churches were not really satisfied. He introduced just some line array solutions with subwoofers.
We want to spend as much time understanding how mid-band and low frequencies cover the room as much as high frequencies do.
Back then, low frequency was almost like it was trying to hide issues.
Back before a lot of the predictive tools we had now, you had to have spreadsheets and understand how subwoofers and the wavelengths interacted together to understand how they were coupling and covering the room appropriately.
How churches were doing church was radically changing. We were moving away from organ, piano, orchestra centric to a more really rock and roll.
So that was one of the innovations. We spent a lot of time experimenting and working through and understanding how those worked that I think benefited our clients.
In those early days, people said, we can feel your music. The PAs that you design, we can feel it. And it was a tactile experience that in the early days, churches just simply didn't have. The buildings typically didn't anticipate it, and the systems certainly didn't anticipate it.
So no matter where you were in the room, you got a impactful experience.
We didn't see anyone else in the market really understanding either one of those aspects. And so we were able to take that view and develop a whole new approach to servicing the church and what that meant.
Hey, I'm John McCullough. I am the service programming director for a new partner church of North Point Ministries called East Cobb Church. We, as a North Point partner church, we're fully responsible for everything. But because we are geographically in the neighborhood and all these North Point campuses, we knew that our standard sort of had to be maybe a little higher than what we could even afford. We had to figure out how we could value engineer something that was excellent, which is where Clark came in. Trust, because we knew that North Point had used them so much for so many projects, so many campuses, so many rooms. We knew that if they trusted them, we could too. They were an obvious choice for us to call them and say, hey, would you help us figure out how we can, with our budget, do something excellent with production?
Liberty has a passion of reaching Hampton Roads. We know that our multi-site strategy is what allows us to do that. We partnered with Clark knowing that we needed someone that could help us design the AVL to support ministry with excellence.
Back in the early days, one of the biggest problems with creating a static image of an entire platform for a video venue was that the image was always blurred, so it was obvious you were watching a video.
Clark was a pioneer in what we now call the virtual teaching model. It was birthed out of a need at North Point Community Church to create what is normal across the country as the multi-site model. And George was really instrumental in bringing that idea to true life for North Point Community Church. It's kind of a compelling way to make it appear that there is a live teacher on stage. It uses a large center static shot to make it appear that the pastor is standing on stage, and then a tight IMAG shoulder up shot that we're used to seeing that gives you that connection to the pastor.
Panasonic had a camera that was used by NASA. NASA agreed to send one of those cameras to North Point, and George was part of the group of people that were evaluating that, and that had enough pixels you could begin to develop that illusion of as if you were there.
I could not tell you how thankful I am that we have 3 screens. That really, man, it makes it feel like Pastor Grant is right here on stage.
But the value in that is we literally have people that attend our campuses for a number of weeks and believe that the pastor's literally standing on the stage.
People who are like, I'm not sure about being at a campus where the preacher is, piped into, and they come and they experience that excellence, and it just puts them at ease.
Clark has innovated, many different ways in the last 25 years, but the thing that I always kind of looked to and I latched onto, even implementing that at the church that I worked at before I came here to Clark, was the virtual teaching model. It was kind of the standard that everybody looked to in creating the multi-site strategy model because it works. You really engage with the pastor and the communicator that is on stage in another location. And honestly, innovations like the subarrays and VT camera systems, they used to be a huge deal, and they're a pillar of our business. Now it's a small part of our overall business and just one of the many things we're known for. But I'm just excited that we're continually pushing forward.
That's been a hallmark too, and we're not just limiting ourselves to look at what's sort of being typically used by a church. We're also looking outside of that.
The beauty of working with Clark is they had an intricate understanding of what needed to be done, and literally our architect took their design and placed it within their drawings to make sure that the facility as well as the AVL infrastructure worked together to give an overall great experience.
You think about a design project, if it's new construction, you've got an architect, an electrical designer, you have a structural designer, an interior designer. There's multiple different disciplines, and you have to be able to work well with all of those disciplines because we all interact with one another. Now, I think that's one reason why architects love working with our company.
Visionary Studios has been open since 2002. We're a design, build, construction, and architecture firm. Because we're licensed both as architects and contractors in most states, our projects are just spread out across the nation, and Clark has been able to work with us across the nation because of that. lot of times what happens is if we just work with an AV designer, that design gets changed quite a bit when it gets to the installation. But the strength to work with Clark is that you're both designers and installers. But having you guys work on both means that what we're seeing on the drawings is actually what's getting installed.
One of the best things we ever did was to bring Todd Austin on board to help run the organization.
You know, when I first came here, the thing that struck me was more of the project management style.
He had an architectural construction background.
You're working with architects and GCs. Can we make this company that's something that keeps all the vast knowledge we have technology-wise, but works well in that industry?
He understood all of the elements that we didn't, that didn't have anything to do with AV, but had to do with being on time and being on budget, having a schedule in place for that.
Talks the language. It acts like a construction company. That's how I believe we've evolved the most, is the structure we have in working in our business.
And it's not just being a great AVL design and implementation organization.
We can provide services at lower cost when we're experienced in those processes.
It's also understanding all those other entities and having experience working with all those other entities that make a successful project.
It's so much smoother for the client, for the architect, for the GC, for the electrical contractor, so much smoother for everybody involved.
Being able to future design things that they can't put in now, but having the infrastructure in for that future use has saved churches money.
Over the years, the AVL industry and the construction world has kind of got this, the AVL guys here again, because they didn't talk the language. They didn't do it the way that everybody else in the industry did. And we've tried to become professionals and do that better, so that it's a value add to the client. You get a more efficient system, more error-free process. It's just a better project, which makes everybody's life better.
And even more so, actually, is the 3D modeling. The 3D information we have that we get from Clark, we can actually do clash detection, and we can determine when things are in conflict with one another.
So we've tried to format. We use the same software. We use the same terminology that the GCs and architects do.
Fewer complications during construction, fewer change orders, and just happier churches.
That just creates a value add for the customer and the client that is more efficient. There's less problems.
That's just a huge benefit. Not everybody does that.
Everything in construction world is on drawings. I've been told if it's not on black and white on paper, then we aren't going to build it. It's for our new worship center. The Clark drawings were the largest set of drawings out of any trade.
Everything I get from Clark is very thorough, very detailed, very explained. Everything that I ask for shows up on the next revision that I get.
So being able to have a guy in the AVL world that knows how to speak construction, that knows how to draw a drawing that construction knows how to interpret, is huge.
It's all made very clear to me. Everything I ask for is laid out well, and if I want to scale up or scale down on one certain part of it, that's easily accommodated, and they're always able to do that.
Those drawings, all that information, that early work that we do, the programming work that you do with the churches, all of that just plays into getting the information early and then having a better product at the end.
You know, I started getting involved in Clark right in the middle of the recession in 2007, 8, 9. Going through those tough times, I think we learned a lot. And somewhere in there is where we made the decision to try to diversify.
I started Clark with a focus on the house of worship. And that is still our core, and that's still what we love, and that's still a passion of mine. But because of what we've learned in the house of worship market, it's allowed us to branch out into other markets and bring that same knowledge to those.
We have not just focused on looking for solutions inside our sort of market vertical of the church. We've looked outside that. It has piqued the interest of other organizations, actually very large organizations outside of the church, that have been enamored by our approach and by our expertise, and has allowed us to take some of the things we've learned from the church and apply those to these organizations that aren't in the church itself.
We wanted to do that to give stability to our company, because the goal is for this to be a long-term solution. We want this to last way past George and Houston and myself.
It just happens to be these little add-on areas where people find what we do innovative and interesting, and we develop a friendship, and we end up working together and collaborating together.
That's important to a client when it comes to warranty and stability, and know we're going to be here to follow up, knowing we're going to be here for their next project.
It's the quality of the people we have working in the house of worship systems that has gotten us noticed in other market verticals, and they want us to help in those verticals as well. If you see Clark doing a little bit in here and a little bit in these other markets, that's what's happened. It's more of an organic growth.
We've brought in a lot of ideas from other vertical markets. I think that's made us much better in serving the house of worship market.
Remember the story of us working with the camera from NASA, how no one in the local church market had even thought about looking at a camera like that. We want to take that same thought and philosophy with these organizations that we're working with, and seeing if we can bring things to the table that we otherwise would not have been able to.
Much like I believe our work in the house of worship prepared us and helped us become relevant in other market spaces, what we're seeing now is kind of a completion of the circle of what we're learning in these other market verticals. We're now able to put back into the house of worship designs.
It's allowed us to grow as a company, is sharing that those ideas both directions.
We've had the pleasure of working with some of the most creative and innovative people in the world now. Those nuggets of truth and things we're able to pull back into the house of worship to actually make those systems even better than they were before. Another thing that I'm very proud of over the last 25 years is that the clients that we've worked with have been so fantastic to work with. They've truly been partners.
As a pastor wanting to focus on people and ministry, having Clark as a partner enables me not to worry about anything when it comes to technology. That's a huge blessing.
And it's always wonderful when the clients you work for are also your friends.
Clark became a ministry partner in the gospel for us to help us carry out the vision. Without them, we would have not had the knowledge, the experience, or the ability to complete what God had called us to do.
When you first connect with Clark, a lot of people are surprised how much time we spend actually trying to connect, understand, and create relationships. So much of this is built on trusted partnerships, but trusted relationships more than anything. And that really is one of the things we spend the most time focusing on. Obviously, we're a technology company, but we also spend a lot of time understanding you as a person and as a church organization and what you're trying to do holistically to reach your community.
They are so far beyond just selling us some gear and leaving us.
With all the online retailers, the ease of being able to purchase equipment, Clark is really not in the business of being a transactional company. Really what we're after is creating long-term partnerships. The partnerships that are built on trust and built on year-over-year experiences where you can't go get that experience and that trust and that partner from someone else without multiple years of experience. And that's really what sets us apart.
What I love about Clark is that they are deeply invested in partnering with us, getting our vision.
And over the past 25 years, I can truly say I have wonderful friends all across this country that if I just happened to show up in a town and have an overnight to stay, I could call them up and they would still pick up their phone and we could sit down and have coffee and lunch.
If there's not enough built-up trust and relational capital going into these projects, the ability to pick up the phone, have an honest discussion, understand the thoughts and the reasons behind where decisions are made, you're going to have a hard time with these projects. And that's why Clark spends so much time trying to understand you, create the relationship so that there's no issue picking up the phone, having a hard discussion. But at the end of the day, we want you to know that we're there to help you, to serve you, and to serve your community alongside of you.
We love having an integrator like Clark. It's because someone thought through everything before we had to.
I had heard great quality. I'd heard Clark cares more about infrastructure than the gear that's going in because they want to set you up for the long term.
Or if we need to expand on something, there's someone like a human that we can call so that we have access to them.
Every step of the way, Clark was walking with us going, hey, we could try cutting this thing out and we could try a different version of this and we can try to value engineer a way to make it really good but yet meet the budget line that you're trying to hit.
But the phrase I always heard in a conversation was, if you don't have $1 million, don't call Clark. And that's just not accurate.
It made things a lot easier for me.
And we didn't have $1 million and we signed with Clark and it was fantastic.
But also knowing like I have to keep it at a certain number, and Clark was great with doing that.
To answer your question, I would say doing things right the first time helps our production and our staff win at what we're asking them to do.
The team here at Clark spends an amazing amount of time trying to understand who the client is, but then also helping understand who Clark is, how we plan to serve and come alongside you in your ministry. That is really what we are about.
The biggest win for us in partnering with Clark is having the same team. Like, we've had the same engineer on all of our projects.
I love that there's an expert in every field that I oversee. There's someone at Clark I can call who I can trust is at the top of their game in that field. Or I know there's someone at Clark I can trust to give me the right answers for the right solutions for the future.
Just being able to help inform those decisions. We've got a bunch of smart people and staff, but having a huge team of people with more experience than anybody here at our disposal to just say, hey, if you're trying to get to here, that decision's going to hinder you. And if you're going to spend money, let's spend money right, and let's spend it to get you where you're trying to go.
But being able to have those people who are now friends and be able to call them and say, hey man, we're thinking about doing this project, what should we be looking at?
It's just a fantastically satisfying feeling to know I've got dear friends all across the country.